This is the workshop on dance. Yeah, you're okay with that? Yeah. No, you haven't attended the wrong one. We'll think a little bit about really intentional disciple making in this seminar today, in this workshop today. But also what we'll think about is and how we do that in terms of the context of a small group. And for the first half, we'll think about that in kind of the bigger picture on why discipling in a smaller group is important and helpful, and maybe some of the dynamics of that. And in the second half, we'll get really practical and think about actual small group meetings. So whenever you gather with a small group, what I guess practical pointers of what might be helpful in that. And I'll pause now and again for a chance for you to either talk to your neighbour, for you to reflect on your own, or maybe towards the end for you to share with the whole group some of your reflections, or to ask me some questions as well. Just to introduce myself, my name's Rick. I have been in ministry in Ireland for about the last 15 years or so. I've come from a background of youth ministry initially, but for the last 7 years I've been working for a large denomination, so a network of about 300 or 400 churches right across Ireland, and I've been developing training for leaders, developing resources for small groups and discipleship, and all sorts of things as well. I'm a dad. I'm married to Sarah. We have 3 children, so one who's 9 years old, one who's 5 years old, and one who's 3 weeks old. And so it feels like kind of painful to be here, to be honest, if that makes sense, and maybe a little bit of guilt of leaving behind Sarah and little Anna, but really glad to be with you folks this afternoon as we share like this as well. I should say, sorry as well, and this will be helpful hopefully later, I've been leading small groups for probably all of that time in ministry and before it. Youth ministry forces you into smaller groups of people, and that was really helpful for me. But for the last sort of 5 or 6 years in our church, we've been heading up a kind of smaller group discipleship ministry in our church as well. So that's where some of these reflections will come from today as well. Whenever I was a teenager, whenever I was at school and I was studying mathematics, one of the things that I hated most was whenever my teacher came around and looked at our work, and she used to say a phrase which I really hated her saying. She used to say, "I don't just want to see the answer, I want to see your method." And it really frustrated me, because I used to think, well, what does it matter? If I've got the right answer, then that's all that's really important, right? For her, she was maybe trying to prove or work out that I hadn't just copied the answer, from the back of the book, or from my friend who was sitting beside me, if it was right, and maybe if it was wrong as well. She wanted to see where I'd gone wrong, to maybe help me, to point out, to say, well, this is why you've gone wrong, this is where you need to go back to as well. Well, what we're going to think about in this first part of this workshop today is the method of Jesus as he sought to make disciples. Now, we could take a whole week or a whole set of workshops on Jesus' method, and so there are various things that we could pull out and tease out, but it has been said that Jesus had a method in how he made disciples. And so Jesus had a message, and his message is emphasized and talked about, and rightly so. But there was also a method in what Jesus did, or in how Jesus went about making disciples. And Greg Ogden writes this. He says, "Scripture is not only a message book, but also a method book. It conveys not only the what, but also the how. Embedded in the story of the good news is instruction and modeling of the means we are to use to ensure its transmission into the lives of the next generation." And then this, he says, "My fundamental assumption is we have less of a message problem today than we do a method problem. We haven't been looking to Scripture to show us how people grow to maturity in Christ." So obviously, we should attach lots of significance to what Jesus said. But what I want to do, just for a brief period at the start of this workshop, is also look at what Jesus did and to see the method. Because over a period of more than 3 years, Jesus was modeling a pattern for us to study and to follow. And maybe, unfortunately, as we consider how to make disciples, we don't always, we maybe look to books or materials or people or even conferences to tell us what we should be doing, when actually there's things that we can also learn from the actual method of Jesus. So how did Jesus actually make disciples? Okay, let me read 3 short verses from Mark chapter 3, verses 13 to 15. Mark chapter 3, verses 13 to 15. It says, "And he went up on the mountain and called to him those whom he wanted, and they came to him. And he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so that they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach and have authority to cast out demons." He appointed the 12, and then the passage goes on to name, to identify, to describe who those 12, what their names were, and who they were. Written in the Bible are the names of 12 people who Jesus specifically invested in for a period of time. 4 short things, quick things about the method of Jesus. Jesus invested in a few. Now, Jesus spent time with crowds, okay, and we'll think about this in a moment. Jesus preached to large numbers of people, it seems. He did miracles where larger groups seemed to be present. But Jesus didn't spend all his time this way. And it's interesting how the journey of discipleship actually starts for Jesus and his disciples. You see, Jesus had already gathered a larger group of followers who were following him, or who seemed to be interested in what he was saying, who were around his life. But Jesus moves at this stage in Mark's gospel, and in other gospels too, from attracting a crowd to investing in a few. We're told that he goes up on a mountainside and he calls to him those whom he wanted. He appointed 12, we're told. And the selection of these disciples was a crucial moment in Jesus' ministry, so crucial that he spends a whole night in prayer before doing so. And that might be an interesting thing to reflect on too, just as a side note. But I find the approach of Jesus really fascinating here, because Jesus, the ultimate communicator, okay, we're hearing about that this morning, the ultimate storyteller, Peter was reminding us. The person who could draw crowds if and when he wanted to, chose to do ministry in this way. He could have filled stadiums. He could have gone on a kind of preaching and miracles tour, and he could have influenced the Caesars of his day and philosophers and kings. But Jesus chose to invest in a small group of people who went on to impact the whole world. And yes, please hear me, Jesus loved everyone equally. Jesus loved everyone equally, but he didn't invest his time equally. He invested his time disproportionately in people. And the ministry of Jesus can be summarized in these 5 numbers. You might have seen this before, where we see Jesus with crowds, 5,000, more than 5,000 really, but in the Gospels we see at least 5,000 people with Jesus on at least on a couple of occasions. He fed the crowds, he taught the crowds, and there was a larger group of people. Within that crowd then there were 70 or 72 others. Luke 10, actually this morning, Peter again reminded us of that at the start of that passage, where Jesus has this wider group of followers, of people around his life, and he sent the 70 or 72 out in mission in pairs. And then within that 72, there was these 12 who he specifically identified, who he called apostles, who would be future leaders, who he raised up. And then within the 12, there's these 3, Peter, James, John, who, again, for whatever reason, they seem to be with Jesus more than the others. They're named more often. They seem to get to go to the really special miracles, So they're up the mountain on at the Transfiguration. They are at certain healings. They're in the Garden of Gethsemane at one of the most intense moments of Jesus' life. And then, as well, there's the one early in the morning, up a mountain at the other side of a lake. Jesus is alone with his Father, in prayer or in devotion, in silence and solitude. And it's interesting to me that if you watch the direction of the Gospels, it seems to me that Jesus is almost always moving from this side to this side. He's almost always moving, escaping the crowds to be with the few. And even escaping the 12 to be with the 3, and even leaving the 3 alone at times, for him to be alone with his Father. And yet how often in ministry, or in our leadership, or in our disciple making, are we trying to do the opposite journey? Ignoring, replacing even devotion with the Father to being around people, and maybe at times, maybe neglecting or not seeing much significance in the few because we want to create more or draw more in or build it bigger. And please hear me today, that comes out of a good heart, I know, because I feel it and I experience that too. But actually, what if the most effective or the more effective ways of making disciples happened in smaller spaces? What if larger crowds actually create a more consumeristic approach where we are reliant on other people to tell us the answers rather than actually being forced to have to think and speak and act ourselves? You see, so often we walk the other direction when the ironic thing is that Jesus chose the method of equipping and multiplying over attracting and adding. He invested in a few, not because he didn't care about the many, but he invested in the few because it was the method he chose to reach the many. You know, if what you ever do feels small, and I don't know the context you've come from, if what you ever do in ministry feels small, you look around the room and you think, well, sure, there's only a few, or where is everyone? Or some people have chosen to walk away. Can I encourage you today that small doesn't mean insignificant? Small doesn't mean insignificant in the kingdom of God. Don't despise the small things. The way of discipleship is often more subtle than spectacular. The way of discipleship is about deep investment so that it would lead to wide impact. Jesus invested in a small group, okay? But so maybe even as you think about that, as Jesus invested in a few, I wonder today, as you might want to reflect beyond this workshop, who are your 3? Who are your 12? Who could you invest in a more relational or significant or intentional way? He invested in a few, but he also prioritized relationship, and this is really important. He appointed 12, the Bible tells us, or Mark tells us, that he appointed 12 that they might be with him. And I imagine that this verse could end differently in other ways. He appointed 12 so that he could inform them about all the things that they needed to know. He appointed 12 so that he could take them through a leadership class or a leadership seminar. He appointed 12 that they might be with him. And Jesus was demonstrating that disciple making was actually done up close. He didn't just tell them to sign up for a class or give them a book to read, but he actually spent time with his disciples. He didn't just teach them from the front, he did that, but he modeled his life side by side along the way. And they walked and they talked and they served together and they ate together and they journeyed together and they ministered together. Jesus wasn't a talking head, he was a living example. And as we think about how we make disciples, and even how we make disciples in smaller groups, we've got to make time for relationship, where we might be with others, where they might be with one another, where we create time for relationship. And with Jesus, this is the whole idea of the incarnation of God coming close to be with his people, to step among humanity and become flesh, God becoming flesh. It wasn't just, with Jesus, his method wasn't just come and see. That's how it started, by the way. It wasn't just come and see, but it was come and be with me. And as you are with me, you will learn to become like me. Discipleship, being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, so that we could learn to do what Jesus did. How much of our discipleship, disciple making is emphasized on being with one another, but also learning to be with Jesus. Intimacy over activity, not just doing, but being. And I think if we're to model Jesus' way of disciple making in this, I think it's going to involve open homes and open lives and open tables involving sharing not just the truth and the information that we know, but actually sharing our lives as well. It's about people more than it is about programs. And sometimes the program gives us the opportunity to be with the people, and that's great. So we should use that. But it doesn't just stop there. Prioritizing being with Jesus. You know, small groups provide a context for someone to be known. Particularly as churches or ministries grow larger, small groups give us an opportunity for someone to be known by others as well. So how can we get alongside people, but also how can we create environments and spaces where people can be with one another as well? Jesus prioritized relationship, but he also pursued transformation. It's been said, I think it was Max Lucado, who wrote that Jesus loves us just the way we are, but he loves us too much to allow us to stay that way. And so with Jesus, it's come as you are, but it's not stay as you are. Jesus pursued transformation. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I'm going to look after you. Isn't that what he said? Oh no, sorry, I've misquoted him. Hold on. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I'll provide everything you want. No. Come follow me, Jesus said, and you'll have a really nice life. Come follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. In other words, if you follow me, Jesus is saying to these people, I'm going to make you, I'm going to form you, I'm going to shape you into something different than you are. In other words, there's going to be transformation that happens. I'm going to change you, Jesus is saying. The emphasis for Jesus is on transformation. And so as we seek to influence, lead, disciple people, our hope and our heart for them should be to bring them towards encounter with Jesus that leads to transformation. And so at times it's not always just, well, you know, that's great. I know that's a struggle. And, hey, that's okay. But at times there's an element of challenge. And the stronger the relationship is, I would argue, the stronger the opportunity for challenge as well. But I had to quote a Belfast author, and this is C.S. Lewis, and he said, he coined this little phrase for people to become like little Christs. And I love that idea. That's maybe a phrase of what we're actually trying to do as we disciple others. We're trying to help them to become, and us to become, like little Christ. The church exists for nothing else, he argued, but to draw people to Christ and for them to become like little Christs. And for me, the best image, I don't have it on the screen, I thought I did, but the best image for me is the image of a learner, an L plate on a car. That's for us in Northern Ireland. If you're learning to drive, you have a big giant red L plate or an L that you carry about on your car. Maybe it's different elsewhere, but it's this image of being a learner. And that's the idea of discipleship. We're learners. It's a process of transformation. And then lastly, and this is really important, Jesus engaged his disciples in mission as part of their discipleship process as well. So again, this verse, he appointed 12 that they might be with him, but there's not a full stop, that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach. If we think of that other command as well, follow me and I will make you what? I'm making you into fishers of people, fishers of men. And so there's this almost implication that as you follow Jesus, you're going to, or as Jesus draws you in, drew these people into a kind of discipling environment, if you like, he was actually sending them out as well and wanting to engage them in mission. See that in Luke 9 and 10. It's like a hinge point where Jesus, for several chapters in Luke's gospel has been doing all the preaching and doing all the miracles, and he's been teaching the parables and doing lots of ministry. And then in Luke 9, he says to them, right, now it's your turn. You've listened and you've learned and you've watched and you've seen. And now is your opportunity. Now it's your turn. And I imagine the disciples might have been like, what? Well, we thought the deal was it was just you doing it. But he prepared them and he equipped them and he sent them out as well. For Jesus, discipleship was not a cozy club. It was an outward moving mission. And actually it was by engaging them in mission that they came back with questions, hungry to learn more. And sometimes people say, how do we create or develop hunger in people to learn more? It's interesting as you look at Luke chapter 10. Jesus sends the 72 out in pairs, but they come back and they ask Jesus questions at the end of that time. They're saying, tell us about this. Why couldn't we do this? Well, they had stories to tell of how they'd seen God at work, but they also had questions. They wanted to know more. It created a hunger and thirst in them. And so as we disciple or seek to disciple, particularly in smaller groups, I think this is a dimension that can often be neglected. How can we create kind of missional opportunities within smaller groups for people to be engaged in and to help them learn as well? I love this quote. Disciple making for Jesus meant meeting the needs of the people where they were spiritually and then challenging them to the next level. His goal was multiplication, and with laser focus, he trained his few disciples to multiply their lives in others. When Jesus called his disciples, he was inviting them into a life of transformation. He was challenging his disciples and sending them out. And so it's worth reflecting maybe today on how mission could be better incorporated into our smaller group discipleship. Maybe if there's a group that you mentor or lead, maybe you might want to think today, how do I this line here, challenge them to the next level? How do I push them out of their comfort zone in order that they might learn? What initiative or what challenge could I give them, either for them to go off and do and come back and share? I have a friend who did a course on evangelism, and it was a year-long course, and he signed up to the whole year, but on the very first week of the evangelism course, they gave him an assignment to do. And he's well read, he enjoys reading, and he enjoys doing assignments, and so he heard at the start of the course there was going to be an assignment after session 1 or 2. And he was really excited about this. He was well used to learning. He turned up, and at the very end of session 1, they were teaching them about having spiritual conversations with people who didn't know Jesus. So he was all ready to read the best scholars about this, and the assignment they gave him was to go and talk to 5 people who didn't know Jesus, who he was already friends with, and to ask them about what they believed. He was totally pushed out of his comfort zone, but it forced him into an environment where he was forced to engage in some form of evangelism. And he came back to session 2 or 3 or whenever it was, ready to learn even more because he'd had an experience of doing evangelism and he was reflecting on it. So as you lead people, as you disciple people, that might be something to think about, of how you kind of create mission now and again, even to get people out of their comfort zone as well. One brief comment looking back, and one brief comment that will move us forward. For some of you in the room, you may be a church leader and thinking, well, I've already lots of things on my, lots of tasks on my to-do list. How on earth do I make time to, lead the meetings and preach on Sundays and prepare that and pastor people and care for people and actually now meet with a smaller group of people or invest in a smaller group of people? In the church I'm an elder in, our senior pastor, senior minister retired last year after 20-something years in leadership, Christian ministry in our church. And he said when he was retiring, he said the single most helpful thing for him that he did in the context of his ministry was making sure that he met with a smaller group of people every week. Now, those people changed throughout the years of his ministry. For some of those years, it was that every year he helped and signed up for our Alpha course, and to help with our Alpha course. So he wasn't necessarily leading it or always speaking at the front, but it meant he was in a small group having conversations with people about Jesus every week, and they became, for that season, a group of people who he could invest in, develop relationship with, maybe follow up on beyond as well. At other times it was joining just one of the small groups. At other times it was inviting maybe some key or future potential emerging leaders into a group that he could read a book with or to do something with. But for him, he talked about the seasons where he didn't do that as intentionally as being the seasons where he felt just further away from people that he was trying to lead. can I encourage you to, I'm not saying this through this workshop that it needs to be all of your time. There are still things that you need to do, but to find time, carve out time to make this as an intentional part of your week or life. And also then, if you're here today and you're thinking, hey, I want to grow as well, can I encourage you to think about doing that in the context and finding ways that you can do that with smaller groups of people, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. So not abandoning that's Hebrews 10, by the way, but not abandoning the kind of larger group or the wider church, but adding that as well. I would say about the 1, 3, 12, 72, and 5,000, that these are actually environments for, I was going to think of it, I won't, but these are all environments that help us to grow as disciples and are environments for us to use in disciple making. So engaging people in mission like the 72, and meeting in larger crowds, hey, like we're doing this week, but also finding that just spending time alone with God in personal devotion, but also finding whether it's the 3 or the 12, that kind of space where we can be accountable or we can develop in conversation with. And just one picture before we think about the dynamics of small groups themselves. I came across this kind of idea last year, this illustration last year, about giant American redwood trees, okay? So some of the largest trees in the world, some of the most tallest trees in the world. And they're known for their sturdiness and strength and height, obviously. But what's significant about these trees isn't actually what's seen above the surface, but in how their roots grow. Because their roots don't actually, you would think they've got really, really long, deep roots. Well, they do have long roots, but the way their roots grow is not that they go straight into the ground. So they go straight up into the air, but the way their roots grow is like this. They grow up to 100 feet in length, but they spread out underneath the surface. And as they grow underneath the surface, their roots kind of begin to fuse with the other roots beside them, of the trees beside them. And it's that which creates the sturdiness and strength because they're interlocked together. And so if one is swaying in the wind, perhaps it's actually the strength they get from one another. And for me, that's become a picture in Hebrews 10 as the biblical kind of verses, I suppose, that I add on to that as well, to say that we need to not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing. Can you imagine living in such a time where some people might give up the habit of meeting with other Christians? Can you imagine that? Yeah. So the Bible is very relevant. And so we need to be creating contexts and environments where this can happen for people in a spiritual context. Small groups help us move from a crowd to a community. And what I want to do is to think about just for a moment is, what are small groups not about? And what small groups are for? Okay, so what I want to do, we're going to get some things written up on the flip chart, because sometimes it's helpful to think what small groups aren't about. So now what we're going to kind of shift to think about is actually the times, the kind of more, I was going to say the more formal times, but the times that we actually gather together then in smaller groups, whether it's 3 or 4 that you're seeking to disciple, or whether it's a smaller group like for fellowship and Bible study, 8, 10, 12 people. What dynamics are in play there? What are those type of groups for, and what are they not for as well? So could you just take a minute or two again, just with the people beside you, and come up with maybe some answers for that, and then we'll shout out some of those answers, feed them back, and learn together. So what is a small group not for, and what is a small group for? So what are small groups not for? Let's start with a negative. And hey, I'm a Northern Irish man, so I'll start with a negative, okay? So shout out some just phrases or words that come to mind. Gossip. Brilliant. Okay, yeah. So they are not for gossip. Absolutely. I would sometimes say to our group that I lead, that if you're sharing something about an individual, okay, actually it's better not to talk about people who aren't in the room, but to talk about yourself. And that sounds like a strange thing, talk about yourself, but actually whenever you share, that's and also then sometimes, and this is maybe in terms of the positive, but actually helping to build up some sort of trust and to name that in a group from time to time, and just to emphasize that. So yeah, not to talk about the meeting beyond the meeting. Anything else? Keep going.
Not for showing off.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they can become a bit of a, hey, here's how much knowledge I have or information I know about a passage or the Bible. And yeah, not for showing off, absolutely. Yeah.
Not for complaining about other leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. And often, yeah, I can remember a specific group that I met with or led for a while, and often every response, they always defaulted back into what the church was doing and what this looked like in the church. And I was often saying, this is about our own lives, okay? Now, it is about how we relate to one another in the church, but it's not just, well, the church should be doing more evangelism. Well, actually, how much evangelism are we doing, in our lives, in our workplaces, and things like that? So, yeah, great. Couple more. I have a few things that I wrote down. You've maybe got some of them. Yeah, I said it's not a comprehension exercise, so it's not just let's give us facts about a Bible passage. Okay, that might be part of the conversation that you have if you're having a Bible study, but it should not stop there. It should lead to more. It's not an audience with. And so, I'm a small group leader, and I've got my little group, so I've got them together. They have a captive audience for an hour, and I'm just going to. A bit like this, but I'm just not going to talk at them for the whole time, and here's all the things I know. That is what generally Sundays might be for, or that is what the church gathered, or part of the church gathered, where we're listening to someone who's prepared something, that is preaching. And I'm a huge advocate for preaching, but small groups is not the place for preaching. It shouldn't be passive, and that's linked to that, but people should be encouraged. I don't know if this is later or not, but I'll say it now. Some people have said that the larger a group gets, the more need there is to be professional. It's maybe not a great word, but it's the idea that people need to at least know what they're doing. There needs to be a level of competence the larger a group gets. But the smaller a group becomes, the more opportunity there is for participation. You see the difference? So this morning, 500 of us this morning, it might not have been brilliant for Peter to have stood up and read the passage and say, well, what does everyone think? That might have been difficult, and actually for him to address a large group of people, there needs to be a level of but and this is the opportunity, as a group becomes smaller, there's more opportunity for people to participate, and we'll think about that more specifically in a moment. And lastly, a small group, I don't really believe should be a closed group. Now, there might be merit in identifying people for a set season, but I think especially small groups in the life of a church that maybe are less specific discipleship groups, there should always be an opportunity, a flow in and flow out in many ways. And I think it's a danger for a small group for a long period of time. For a season's okay, but for a long period of time to stay static, because when you stay static, you become stagnant. And so there needs to be an opportunity. I heard of someone joining a new church recently, and they were told, they actually approached the church and said, or the leaders of the church said, we'd like to join a small group. These are friends of ours. They moved from our church for geographic reasons. And they said to us, we want to join a small group. And they were told, so this was in February, they asked, and they were told, yeah, sure, no problem. There's opportunities for that in September. But we've got our group set for the term, and they're like, we need to meet people now. We want to meet people now. So anyway, there's just an example. What is a small group for? Give me some things. Go ahead. Learning, absolutely. Yeah. So actually and this is the opposite of this in some ways, we're approaching a Bible passage or a text or a subject. What we are here to learn, not to show off or whatever. Keep going. Yeah, that's a brilliant phrase. Can you tell us a bit more?
Actually knowing what's happening in each other's lives. So, versus somebody going through some terrible thing, sitting in the pew and nobody knows.
Yeah.
So sharing, openness, creating vulnerability.
Okay, yeah, openness, vulnerability, you're brilliant. I would say linked to this as well, if this is true, it means a small group is not 1 hour each fortnight. Now, it might be that you meet as a small group for 1 hour each fortnight, okay? But it should always go beyond that, or be, growing into to some form of kind of life together, sharing community. Anything more? Absolutely. And that doesn't just happen straight away. And so you as a leader, as you lead, will need to both model that, to emphasize that, to take time to build up. And so that means, for the first time you meet with your group, it might not be the time to say, okay, everyone, what's everyone's secrets? Not barriers are going to go up. Also, if someone shares for the very first time in a group, speaks out loud, anything, it might not be the very moment to just say, well, actually you're wrong. Or here's, so we need to, now there might be a time to tell somebody they're wrong, but it might be a long time down the journey, in terms of relationship. We need to create safe places for people as well, and to really grow that. You were going to say something? Yeah.
Building relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Relationship and building that. Yeah. And so that means even in the times that we are together as well, the Life on Life stuff kind of speaks to us about going out, beyond the meeting, but also in the meeting itself. It means that space needs to be given for relationships. So we set aside 2 hours for our group that meet in our home. And we know, and everyone knows, that for the first half an hour, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, it's gathering in our kitchen for there's tea. Well, there's tea, coffee, someone brings food. And by food, I actually often, this is like a 7:30 meeting for us, so maybe it's something sweet or, a kind of snack. And people come in from 7:30, maybe before it, or maybe after. They drift in, and some go and sit in the living room, some are huddled around the kitchen. But it's just creating space for kind of not one conversation around 10 people or 12 people, but 1s and 2s and 3s, and welcoming people in. And so you need to create space for that. Sometimes that could be at the end, in the middle, whatever it is. But I would plan for that as well. Space to process. I've been confused about what I heard in that sermon last week. Or it says this in the Bible, and I find that really difficult. Can we talk about this? That is a difficult. Again, this morning, no one's asking a question, and rightly so. But there's got to be a space for that, and small groups should create that environment. And I wouldn't recommend this every time, but I can remember with a group of older young people, students, kind of older teenagers, one time we read a Bible passage, and I told them. Now I had prepared. Okay, it wasn't just because I had a bad week, but I said to them tonight, I have no questions that I'm going to ask you. You're going to come up with the questions. And I gave them out little Post-it notes or sheets of paper. And I said, you've read the passage. What is 1 or 2 questions you have about this Bible passage? And they took time, wrote them down. Then we threw them into the middle of the table. You know all we did? I just said, your turn, you pick a question. They picked the question, read it out. And that's what we did for the night. Now, some of the questions were, where is Jericho? Or who is this guy that's mentioned in the story? That's okay. And we kind of, so some questions were quite factual. Somebody answered them. Does anyone know? Nobody knows. Maybe I offered an answer. But some of the questions, as you can imagine, were much deeper as well. And I think there's a place for that, allowing people to process an open group. Okay. A few things. It isn't a formal meeting. And by that, I don't mean it's not fixed and organized. I think small groups should be organized and organic. They're both, okay? But by formal, I don't mean, in some ways, if you're welcoming someone into a home or into your group or sitting around a coffee shop table, you don't need an agenda necessarily. There should be an informality to your conversation. And maybe that comes down to the larger the group gets, the more you need to be professional. The smaller group becomes, the more need there are opportunities to be relational, to be like family as well. So think conversational in approach. It's not a comprehension test. I've probably talked about that already, but by that I mean not just information in our minds, but it should be driving towards application in our hands and our feet and our hearts as well. It isn't an opportunity to preach. I've said that already. It's got to include and involve others. So we need to work hard, draw people into discussion. Hey, you've got the answers here, haven't you? It's not a place to share gossip, but people need to be able to share their weaknesses. And I talked about modeling actually earlier on. That's the thing you might have to model the most as you lead a group. Hey, I'm struggling with this too. Or let me tell you an area of my life that I need prayer for. I'm modeling that. You might need to go first as you do that, and to build up trust. And it's not merely about the gathering, and we've talked about that as well. And so for us, it's WhatsApp messages or throughout the week, or hey, can you pray for this? Or hey, here's a funny thing that happened. Or it's, now and again meeting for a coffee, or touch and base one-on-one with someone, picking up the phone. You were talking about this. Can we talk about it more? The last part of our time together, for what it's worth, okay, is I'm going to share 10 top tips, okay? So this is my way of trying to get really practical. And now this is mainly about leading small group discussion, okay? How can we draw out more conversation? How can we get people to contribute to discussion, particularly if you've got a group of introverts or people who are shy or less to speak less easily. But some of it will go beyond just the discussion. But 10 top tips, okay? Here they are, 2 minutes on each one. And the first one is this: set expectations. I think it's helpful for everyone to come to a set of shared expectations for what they are actually participating in. So for us, this looks like usually the first night of the year where we meet. I often maybe talk about hopes and expectations. So I invite people to share, what are your hopes for being a part of this group? Or if I meet with a group of young leaders for the first time in a kind of discipling context, you've agreed to be here. Why? What's your hope? And often, just simply by people sharing those hopes, it calls people into more. So I have a hope that we would share our lives together, someone says. I say, great, that's brilliant. Well, what will that involve us doing? And so rather than me setting down rules, I'm saying, yeah, I think that's a great thing. We would love to share our lives together. That might mean that we need to be present as often as we can, to be committed, to look out for one another, whatever it is. But setting expectations involves the kind of maybe some of these things. This is not a place for this. Safe space, emphasizing some of those things. I think you might also want to emphasize an expectation is that I would love everyone to feel comfortable sharing and participating. We all might share and participate in different ways, but that's an expectation. Or maybe even taking off the fear that you need to be a theological expert to be able to talk about the Bible. That's an expectation. Hey, as we meet, as we study the Bible, this should be accessible to all of us, or whatever. You don't have to have everything fully processed to speak out loud in the group. Whatever it is, set an expectation. Maybe you might even want to say, hey, I don't want any one particular person to dominate the discussion. That involves me as the leader, but so for your extroverts or for whoever, you might want to just put that expectation out there too. The better you start, the more it will benefit the long term. I think it's helpful to find good content to help you to lead a small group. I think drawing on some kind of Bible study resource or discussion material will help you and will bring a sense of continuity and consistency. I think without this, after 3, 4, 5 weeks or sessions, I think it can become quite maybe generic or samey. And so I would encourage you to find some sort of consistent, good content. Now, in the past, in our small groups, we have relied on good courses, video materials, things from LICC, Discipleship Explored, things like that. And I think there's a real place for that. Sorry, LICC, London Institute of Contemporary Christianity. I've got some kind of good video resources for our context anyway. But I think more and more recently, we've been trying to think as a church about how we link up Sundays and small groups. And so we actually now follow the content of our Sunday sermons in our small groups. And we find that to be useful. So someone's hearing the same passage preached on a Sunday, and then on a Wednesday or whenever they're actually talking about the implications of that. And sometimes the preacher then might even say things like, you'll get a chance to talk about this with your small group, or, here are some things that you might want to talk about. And we've actually created little resources just out of the sermons. So we've asked either the person preaching to create 3 or 4 questions, or when we've been better organized and done kind of themes and series, we've created a little booklet ahead of time as well. So for us, that's been kind of key content as well that you can benefit from. This might sound a funny thing, but I think it's worth thinking through the space that you meet in. If you want everyone to participate, then your space really matters. Space and environment. So things like, can everyone see each other? Now I know, in homes that's, maybe a more difficult dynamic. If I'm leading, I will pick a seat where I make sure that I can at least have eye contact with everyone in the room. So I actually pick the seat. Sometimes I'll leave my Bible on it or something, or get there early. So I always say for small groups, circles are better than rows. So if you can get people into circles for them to share as much as possible, same eye level helps as well. The closer, the better, as well. Everyone should feel part of it as well. So think through your space to create best group dynamics. Push for participation. An old proverb says this: "Tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I may remember. Involve me and I'll understand." That's what I was talking about earlier, by the way. Participation, polish. Anyway, polish is a better word than professionalism. But by involving people, we help them to engage better. By involving people, we help them to remember and recall more. And so that could even be as simple as, we've just read the Bible passage. Turn to the person beside you and recount the story you've just read in your own words. Do you see that straight away? Then you're getting people to think about how often, maybe it's just me, in a church gathering has a Bible passage been read and you close the Bible and you think, I couldn't tell you what I've just read. So even participation, what I might do is get people to read the Bible twice. I'm maybe going into my next point here, but so we read the Bible quietly on our own, silent. The introverts love that. And then actually we'll go around the room and we get everyone to read a verse. So everyone's participating. If I'm asking someone to close in prayer or maybe to open in prayer, I will not choose the person who's likely to dominate the discussion the most. Their voice is going to be heard. I'm going to think about how somebody could participate who might put themselves forward less. And on participation, I would try to get people participating, not just in discussion. So I put together a rota of who's going to bring the food. I don't do that every week. Why would I? That's an opportunity for someone to participate. And they bring food and they think about it, and we sometimes even create a bit of competition with it, and who's going to bring the best, and sometimes we do a bake-off type thing or whatever, but just as participation, people feel part of it. I sometimes ask someone, could they share their favorite worship song at the start as a time of worship, so they come and they talk about their favorite worship song, play it on YouTube. Sometimes we sing, sometimes we just listen. Or I say, we used to have a thing called 60-second sermon, where it was really thought for the day, but we just said to someone, just come, and we asked. We've also done little slots before, like windows in their world, where someone talks about or this time tomorrow is the same idea. So this idea of someone shares what they're going to be doing this time tomorrow. So they talk about their workplace, or they talk about, and you just get a window. I don't know about you, but sometimes I've been in the same church as somebody for like 5 or 10 years, and I kind of know them, and I kind of know roughly what they do for their job, but I don't really have a clue what it involves. And so just giving somebody the opportunity to share, what are you doing tomorrow? What's the challenges in your workplace? What are the opportunities as a Christian? Participation, just getting people to participate. So creating 1 or 2 little slots like that, I think, help that. So, and the other thing is, I lead our group. My wife and I lead our group, but I don't always lead the discussion. So I might say to somebody, who's able and gifted, but again, it's pushing them. I say, will you lead the discussion next time? They lead it, but you know what? I get to contribute then. So I get to answer the questions, but I get to participate as well. And that's important sometimes, that you're not always just the one. Warming up the conversation of depth and meaning take time. And people aren't, to develop discussion, I always say it's like a funnel. So when you begin, your first question or activity should always be designed in a way that everyone, no matter their spiritual maturity or knowledge, could be able to contribute to. So start with questions that participants could easily respond to, and not a question that would leave anyone feeling too vulnerable or nervous. So maybe get people sharing something life-related. Today we're going to be talking about, I don't know, Jesus calming the storm. The disciples were really scared. Everyone talk about a funny phobia that they have, something lighthearted or the favorite holiday destination that you've been to. That's okay. Everything doesn't have to be really, really intense and spiritual. Sometimes just sharing little windows into people's lives are helpful as well. And also with warming up the conversation, and I know this, and I've mentioned this already because I'm married to one, okay, but introverts need processing time. And so sometimes I might say, here's the opening question tonight, or here's the thing that we're thinking about. We're going to be quiet for the next 60 seconds, and we're all going to think. Because some people hate being landed with a question, and they think, oh my goodness, I don't know what to say. But just being given, or even I'm giving you out a Post-it note, and write down some thoughts you have, and then people have something to read. And that helps in the beginning, certainly, to warm up conversation. And if you are finding that maybe few people are contributing to a discussion, even in a group of 8, 10, 12 people, I would often break people into pairs or into threes and say, talk about that for a moment. And then what happens is you're asking people to feed back. And so you say, well, we're going to go round, and sometimes people will feel more keen to feed back because they have said something in a pair or in a three and someone has nodded their head and they know that they're not stupid. And so someone has nodded their head and then they feel more confident to speak it out, okay? Observe the Bible text. This maybe should have come higher up, okay? But it's really important. It's really important that our conversations in small groups, especially kind of Bible study groups, are actually based on what the Bible is saying or what the Bible has said, and not just some kind of Sunday school version that we have in our mind. And so I would take time to introduce the Bible passage, take time to read it together, maybe read it twice, get people reading it in smaller groups. On occasions, I give out the Bible passage on a sheet of paper with kind of maybe, everyone has a pen, and then I ask them to underline something that strikes them. With young people before, I've got them like 3 colored pens, and they're like circling words that they are confused by, or putting a question mark, or highlighting like a command from Jesus, or a command that's in the text. But kind of doing things like that, maybe just break up. It gives people a chance to actually observe the text. So you're actually providing an activity and not just conversations. And as you observe, as you introduce the Bible text, take time to observe what's actually there. What do you see? What do you notice? What is Jesus doing here? What does this reveal to us about God? What struck you the most? What verse stood out to you? Those are really low-level questions. Everyone should be able to have an answer, I think, to what verse struck you the most. You don't have to talk about it theologically or understand it, but you're just helping people to observe what's there as well. As a leader, it's helpful to answer questions with a question often, okay? We saw Jesus did this pretty often. And I think there's a pressure on a leader at times, particularly in a smaller group, maybe even in a quieter group. Somebody says something and you feel the need to commentate on it, to answer, to maybe even critique or to correct. How can you answer questions? And it's so tempting to jump in with advice. Someone shares a struggle they have. Well, this is what I would do. It's not always the most helpful launching pad in a conversation. Giving advice prevents people from thinking for themselves. You're just telling them what you would do, but you're not helping them to think about what they would do. And the way to develop discussion is not to fill silence with advice, but to open it up through questions. A reply of, what does anyone else think? Here's a question. Or just like what I did with you, tell me more. That sounds interesting, what you've said there. Can you tell me more? Has anyone else experienced what, Danny is talking about here? Has anyone else experienced that? So someone's just been vulnerable, shared a weakness. We jump in with advice. It closes down conversation. But actually, has anyone else experienced? Well, yeah, I have. I've found a time where I have struggled to experience God. Suddenly someone knows they're not on their own, and whenever anyone else was in a situation like it's just been described, what helped you? and you're beginning to look at that. As you look at the Bible text itself, someone has a question. Does anyone else have an answer? You might have an answer, or it gives you time to form one as well. So listening well to others, teasing out conversation as well. So follow Jesus' example and answer questions with questions. Go beyond comprehension. So for me, it's not just, Bible study should not just be what's the name of the Pharisee in verse 13. Go beyond comprehension. So it's not just single answers, not just yes or no questions, but if Jesus sent his disciples out like lambs among wolves, Peter said this morning, what does that mean for the places that you find yourself in this week? Can you hear the kind of openness of that question? You're going beyond the comprehension of the passage, the beginning to apply it to people's life. If Paul's teaching the early church about self-control, what areas in our life might that be difficult in? Or do we need this? What does this passage mean of us? How does this truth help us? What does this passage command of us or ask of us? You're going beyond comprehension. Obvious comprehension. A couple more, and then we're nearly done. Leave space, okay? Leave space. This is really important. Don't be so focused on the schedule or the resource that you miss what God is doing among you. In your times together, leave space to respond to what God might be doing or what you've been learning. So make space to pray for one another. Don't be scared to laugh or to cry together. Make space that if someone has shared something really vulnerable and you're thinking, well, I need to get to the end of these questions, and this person who's crying is hijacking it, no, go with that at times. Go with that and say, let's pause and pray for whoever that is, or let's talk about that. Or tonight I had this agenda, but it might be more helpful for us to talk about that. Take time to eat and hang out together as well. But even what I would try to do is, as you get to the end of a discussion, whether it's with 2 people or 3 people or 12, I would sometimes say, what's the takeaway? So we've been learning tonight about this concept or theme or passage, but what does this mean for you? What will you do differently in your life as a result of being together? And that's just leaving space for people to share. I even just try a few different things, like putting on a song for a moment, and I leave space to reflect in silence before we finish, maybe silent prayer or whatever. Give out Post-it notes again and let people write things, and maybe leave a prayer request on the table and ask people to take one of the prayer requests for someone else and say, over the next week, I'd like you to pray for this person or whatever it is. And lastly, about leaving space, do not be afraid of silence. Do not be afraid of silence. Long silences might feel awkward, but they have a place. I think silence gives people time to think or process. So as a leader, you might know the material inside out, but this might be the first time someone's thought about it and they've just come from work. Give them space to process, and silence can do that. Silence can be powerful, but maybe as a leader you need to give permission for silence, to say, we're going to be quiet now. Or you ask a question, everyone's quiet, and say, yeah, I know that's a difficult question. Silence is okay for a moment. And then when you're ready, maybe someone will share. So naming it, and naming it helps it not to be as awkward in some ways as well. And lastly, and we've hinted at this, but my encouragement would be go beyond the group. We assume that the biggest impact in people's lives will come through the formal parts of our program. But, last week in our church, one guy came in and we hadn't seen him for 3 or 4 weeks, and he came into the back of our church and he was wearing a neck brace. And I got chatting to his wife afterwards. I said, what happened to Jason? I didn't know. And she said he fell off his bike and had a bit of an accident. And she said he was in hospital on a spinal board for a week. And she said, and I said, my goodness, have people been helping you? Or I didn't know, maybe some of our leaders in our church didn't know about this. And she said, our small group have been amazing. Our small group have been amazing. They were bringing meals to her. She's 2 young kids. And they were bringing meals to her. They were looking after the kids while she went to the hospital. They were going beyond the group. They didn't say, well, Jason and Susie can't come for 2 weeks or for the next 2 months probably for him. They were saying, we will go to them or we will help them in whatever way we can. For us in our small group at the minute, it's just making space. We've had a real hard season in our group where, we've been meeting online for a period and then we've been meeting together under restrictions. And we've just said for the month of June, before we finish for the summer, we're just going to take time and meet in a coffee shop. We're going to go a walk. We're going to meet after church on Sundays for a lunch. And we're just going to take time for that kind of informal time as well. But this sounds strange, and I'll finish with this. As a leader, you need to organize it. As a leader, sometimes you need to take the initiative. We're going to organize a meal rota for this family in need. We're going to meet in the park at this time. We're going to go a walk. We're going to meet in the coffee shop. You as a leader can take initiative. And lastly, and go beyond the group, this involves the one-to-one. Hey, you were in tears last week. Do you want to meet up for a coffee and talk about it? Or encouraging people about what they shared. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for what you shared tonight. That made a real difference. Encouraging people, texting people. My wife doesn't like sharing in smaller groups, but she shared something one night of something she was really nervous about, and an appointment that she had the next week. And someone in her group on that morning texted her and said, I'm praying for you. That's going beyond the group. She was noticed, she was heard, she was remembered, and it drew her into community. She's more likely to share about it the next time because someone cared enough to notice. There's my 10 points for what they're worth. I'm going to stop there and let you finish. Maybe just a quick plug. I've written a book about discipleship. It's on the bookstall downstairs, Deep Roots of Resilient Disciples, and it might be a resource that you could use with smaller groups. There's questions at the end of each chapter. It's designed that way, or it might just help you to think about through some of these issues.